Yeah, you guys know you were dancing. Let's be honest. We were all dancing right there. It was just too good. How can you not? Anyway, hello and welcome everybody to our final Preptober live stream. I hope you guys have had a wonderful weekend since we last spoke to you on Thursday. And I hope you enjoyed our groovy little intro. Worked super hard on that, just saying. Very excited to be doing this. I can hardly believe that we're already through October, first of all, and that Nano is next Monday. I'm not prepared emotionally or mentally for this to take place. But I'm hoping that you guys are maybe a little bit more structured than I am. I've been just kind of running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So today we are going to be talking about how to implement everything that we have been discussing over the prior 3 weeks. We've talked about how to pick your whip on. We've talked about how to plot. We've talked about how to brainstorm. We've talked about how to make interesting, relatable characters. That was particularly in one of the coaching streams. We've talked about and really tried to do our best to help set you guys up for success during Nano. Because as authors who have done it, we all understand it's hard. And we want you guys to be successful because there is nothing quite like finishing that first draft and being like, oh my gosh, I almost have a book. It's a fantastic feeling. So in today's live stream, we're going to be covering, how to get through your first draft, how long it should realistically take you. We'll be talking about deadline writing, which was a challenge for me as a pantser. I was just like, ain't nobody's going to put me in a deadline. And I had deadlines. So we're talking about the emotional process of how to keep yourself writing when you want to throw yourself off the emotional precipice upon which you find yourself at some point, most likely in the 3rd to 4th week of Nano. Historically, that's where I've seen it. It's like week 1, you're like 50,000 words. I eat that for breakfast. Week 2, you're like, all right, it's going to be a stretch. Week 3, you're like, why did I do this? Week 4, you're basically having an emotional breakdown. And week 5, if you've survived that long, it's a crapshoot. It's up in the air as to what's going to be happening by week 5. But we're going to walk you through it because writing sprints, they're coming. Brace yourselves. It's going to be fantastic. For those who are going to be watching later, those links to the writing sprints, they'll be up in the right-hand corner. So make sure that you go and you set the reminder for it. It's going to be awesome. And we'll also be talking, brief topics on the front end, Q&A, talking about what you guys are writing. It's going to be a great time. I think that covers everything in the introduction portion of our madness. And so we're going to go ahead and dive on into the first topic here, which is why it shouldn't take longer than 6 months to write your first draft. And it shouldn't. So I still don't know why I'm going first. Simone, you're gonna need to change something up here. Like I'm always going first. I'm always on the spot.
For the last one, when we do the last one, the parting one, then
okay. All right, that's fair. All right, and if you guys haven't known, like we all know each other. It should be abundantly clear by this point that we all know each other and we like giving each other a bad time because authors. Now, when it comes to writing your first draft, and as someone who is guilty of this, we tend to fall into the cycle of my first draft sucks. I need to start it over again. And guess what? It's technically still a first draft when you start it over again. I hate to break it to you. It's not your second draft. It's draft 1.0. 0.1 at that point. And it doesn't get any better usually. And what ends up happening is you're going around in that circle and you're never actually making any progress in the story. You may feel like it. Realistically, it's not happening. Why? It's because you're still stuck in the same mode and you haven't finished the story. You don't know how it ends. You don't know what happens outside of maybe those first few chapters. And then you're just like, this sucks. I'm going to start over. It's going to be better than last time. But you still haven't finished the story. So one of the interesting things that I decided to kind of test out on some of my unsuspecting subjects, also known as clients, when I first started getting into coaching was developing a writing process. And this was something that I had used for myself. And the template is actually going to be available next week. We're going to have it available for you guys, which I'm very, very excited about. And the template is basically going to walk you through how to find your own writing rhythm. I touched on this before when we started Preptober about finding, your writing number, essentially like schedule an hour, see how many words in an hour you can write, pick the amount of words you want to have per chapter for your overall goal / book length, and then you kind of combine it all together. And you'd be surprised how much that actually helps. When I was first starting to do that, working with clients, I was like, hey, here's what I want you to do. I laid out everything that I just explained. And then I was like, find a time that is consistent. Now, most of the authors that I had worked with had been working on their own books, both fiction and nonfiction, for anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 years or so. And one of my clients, she had 114,000 words of content, but it was not yet a book or a story. And so I was like, here's the process. Take this, implement it, and when you're done, we'll start draft 2. So she finished her first draft, like an actual draft of content. It was still 100,000 words, 4 months. 4 months. We structured 114,000 words, shaved off 14,000 of them, and she had a draft, a completed draft. That was more than she had in the 2 years prior. I had another person who was like, yeah, I've been working on this for a really long time. Same thing. Lots of content, structuring, figuring out how to implement these things. And then it took them 4 months. I think there was like anywhere from 3.5 to 4 months for several of the clients, just kind of as an average, to actually finish a first draft. So if they can finish a first draft in 4 months, then it sure as heck shouldn't be taking you 10 years. Now, I understand that everyone has a different writing process and they're at different places in the writing journey. Here's the difference, though. If you have been working on a book for 10 years, you're not working on the story itself at that point. You're working on you and your own issues, not the book. And I can say that confidently as someone who's done that. I started my own trilogy when I was 17 and worked on it for 10 years in multiple different phases. And guess what? That was not the first book I published. The first book I published is the one that I finished in less than 4 months. I actually finished the first draft in a month, roughly, because I did my own version of NaNo in January 2019. So there is something to be said here about not procrastinating in your writing. Get it done. And I've said this before. if you don't actually take it seriously, where you're willing to dedicate some time to develop a writing process, develop yourself, develop the skills needed, then you will always have aspiring in your bio, and not in a good way. You'll always just have aspiring writer, aspiring author. That's not what you want. That's not what I wanted. Because over time, what ends up happening is that you just feel like I'm just an imposter. I'm not actually a writer. I'm not an author. Look how long it's taken me. So it is possible to actually write a complete first draft in 6 months or less. Now, you actually have to set a schedule for yourself. This is where the discipline aspect comes into play. Now, this isn't Stephen King, you need to write 500 words a day or whatever. I work. I don't write every single day, nor do I get 500 words in a day. Like, that would be awesome. Not logistically possible for what I'm doing. So what I do instead is I pick one day, at least out of my week, that I can purposefully set aside time to do this. Because if I'm not willing to take it seriously, I have no right being an author or trying to sell my book to somebody. Because here's the thing, you may get book 1 out, and if it's part of a series, the peeps want book 2. And if you're just like, I'll just kind of get around to it. It'll take me 5 years to get through, the first draft of book 2, but it'll be fine. People will still be waiting. No, they will not. They'll have died at that point. And so they will have left you behind. So don't make them wait. Be disciplined about it. Again, coming from somebody who's writing book 2. Book 2 is harder than book 1, which means I have to be even more disciplined in order to do that. It takes a lot of intentionality and takes a lot of being purposeful and disciplined in your writing. Now, one of the other aspects of it is that we tend to get into self-editor mode, which is why it's going to take somebody 10 years to do that. And it's because they're not writing, they're editing their small amount of words to death. And again, as someone who's done that, it doesn't get you published. I self-edited the bejesus out of that first trilogy over the course of a decade. Didn't publish it. It's in the lineup still because things fell into place within the world that I've built, but it's not the one that I actually ended up starting my author career with because I was too hard on myself with self-editing. So as you guys are looking to NaNo, here's a tip. Get something like Grammarly. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Grammarly. Sometimes Grammarly has hit the bottle a little too hard, and then it gives you suggestions afterwards. And you're like, Grammarly, I don't think that's right. And Grammarly's like, no, I'm sure it is. It's like, no, Grammarly, it's not. It's really not. I suck at grammar, and even I know it's wrong. So take everything with a grain of salt with Grammarly. But what it does allow you to do, if you're using it appropriately, is get some of the little stuff taken care of. Like, don't know if that comma should be there or not. Don't agonize over it. If you're writing your first draft in Grammarly, let Grammarly clean up some of the stuff. Look at the suggestion. And if it's like, Grammarly, go home, you're drunk, you move along. If you're like, you know what, actually, that does make sense. It tries to take away my Oxford comma, and I have issues with it trying to take away my Oxford comma. So I go, no, Grammarly, stay away. Use tools like that. Simplistic design. It's free. And then when you actually finish your draft and you go back to write draft 2, upgrade to something like Pro Writing Aid. Now, ideally, if you're able to, try and get the lifetime version, like look for sales and stuff for the lifetime. Because seriously, it lasts like 50 years. By the time mine runs out, I will be like old and senile and I won't need it anyway. So it's perfect. It's seriously, it makes such a difference when I'm writing my drafts because I can improve as I write and it's doing a portion of the editing for me. I don't have to think about it. I have to just go, does that look right in context? Yes. Click. Changed. Moving on. Use tools like that to your advantage. Don't just take everything it suggests, but again, be thoughtful about it. And doing that will actually help you to finish a draft. You also have to understand that it's okay that your first draft is a dumpster fire, an absolute dump, because you are quite literally brain dumping your story onto the page. So once you've gotten the mess out, you'll actually see from start to finish, like, oh, that happened too late, so I need to move that back. That character did something they weren't supposed to, and that would have consequences up here. And this middle part, not sure. It's like what happens after you've had too many boxes of donuts. It just sags in the middle. So I need to firm that up a little bit. Got to trim some of that off. Those are the types of things that you'll see when you have finished. So get to the end and then move on to your second draft. Once you've had a chance to actually take in that first draft and what it actually realistically looks like. And don't let anybody else see it. I never let anybody see my first draft. Now I do with some of my betas because I've improved enough to know that it's not that big of a dumpster fire. And I appreciate some of their feedback because they're super fans. And so they'll be like, oh my gosh, this dumpster fire is so amazing. Be like, I really appreciate that. It helps my ego and keeps me going. It'll get better. Don't worry. That's okay too. But until you have that solid group of people, don't show it to anybody. Clean it up, show your second draft to people because you're going to feel more confident about that anyway. So that is how you can start off and why it shouldn't take you more than 6 months. You seriously can. If you implement a writing process and you're disciplined about it, you can finish your first draft in 3 to 4 months. It is possible to do. And that's not writing every day. That's being consistent with when you are doing your writing. That's it. So that being said, that's my mic drop moment. Now I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk about deadline writing and how to hold yourself accountable to doing that. Emily, take it away.
Thank you, Stephen. So when it comes to authors, the biggest thing that I see tripping them up from either starting or finishing their novel is imposter syndrome. And so if anyone's not kind of familiar with that term, really what it is it's kind of that feeling of insecurity or like that not enough mentality that creatives especially get wrapped up in a lot. Really, I find that it's kind of based on one of three or like a combination of the one of three different things. One is kind of the expectations that you put on yourself. 2 is the expectations that others put on you. And 3 is the expectations that you think others are putting on you. Yeah, there's a good distinction there. That's important to note. But imposter syndrome is something that every author, every creator struggles with. it's kind of just a natural part of the process of being a creator and kind of being willing to be vulnerable on a page or a canvas or whatever it is that your medium is. This part is kind of my opinion. My fellow author coaches can kind of push back on this next part if they have like a contrary view. But I personally think that imposter syndrome isn't really something that you ever get past. It's kind of more something that you have to learn how to harness or lean into rather than something that you let kind of hold you back. The best like analogy that I've come up with for this is the game Spider Stomp. I'm probably like showing my age here, but if you don't know what Spider Stomp is, if you've been to an arcade, you've probably seen this game or like a version of it. But it's basically like a platform with like these painted pictures of spiders on it. And on every spider, there's like a red button. And basically what happens is in your allotted amount of time, random spider buttons will glow red and you have to stomp on them to turn the lights off. And so really this is kind of like imposter syndrome. You never really know like where or when it's going to hit, but randomly it'll just kind of like glow bright red and then you'll stomp it down and then it'll pop up somewhere else and then you got to stomp that down. And you're kind of just like in this continuous dance of like, oh, there it is. Better squash it. There it is. Better squash it. The authors and the writers that I've seen really use this to their advantage and overcome it a lot better than others are the ones that really own the fact that they are authors, no matter like where in the process they are. This is something that I really struggled with at the beginning when I started to take my writing more seriously and started pursuing being an author more seriously. I didn't really feel like I had like the authority to write a novel, which like in and of itself is kind of arbitrary. But I'm kind of a firm believer that everybody has a story to tell and everybody has a story that only they can tell. There's obviously like structures in place and rules that you need to follow, different things like that. But you need to know those in order to break them or lean into them. And all of those things can be learned. If you have a story that you just can't shake for whatever reason, you probably need to tell it. Maybe you need to tell it. Maybe you need to go through the process of telling it, or maybe someone else needs that story, or maybe one of the three or combination. I've also seen authors, and I also struggled with this too. You kind of get wrapped in the idea of like, what if no one wants to hear what I have to say, or what if like people won't care? The reality is that some won't. That's kind of just how it goes. That's okay. Not every story is for every person. That's kind of expected, but it's not really a reason to keep from sharing that story. One of the things that I also see kind of trip authors up is the fact that they'll either overplan or underplan. They'll overplan to the extent, well, they'll lay out the entire book, or if it's a series, they'll lay out the entire series. And they'll hold so fast to that outline that they won't just let the story do what it wants to do, what it feels natural to it. Kind of on the flip side of that, and Stephen talked about this when he wrote his first draft of The City of Snow and Stars, where he didn't really have a plan. He just sat down and kind of like let it go, which like to an extent is good because you want to let the story go where it feels like it wants to, but you also want to have some sort of structure in place, so that you know what your goals are, what the purpose is, what the story is, what your characters look like to a certain degree. Those things will obviously kind of change and grow as the story goes, but you want to have some semblance of a starting point for all of those different things. So really kind of the goal is to plan enough so that you know, again, like what your characters look like, what your plot looks like, all of those different elements. But plan enough that you have a starting point to like launch you into the story, and then you can kind of let it breathe, let it go where it wants to go. I am also guilty of this next part, and this is another thing I'll see with authors, is that they'll hold themselves to unrealistic expectations or undersell themselves. So they'll set goals that are impossible to attain, and then they'll get discouraged when they don't set those goals, and it's kind of like a continuous like snowball effect after that. And then on the flip side of that, they'll set goals that are too easy and that they know they can easily attain. And that doesn't help push them and kind of drive them to that next step in the process. And so again, you want to kind of strike a balance between the two. I have found that it really helps to kind of know yourself and know kind of what you're reasonably capable of. If you can crank out 5,000 words in a day and you know you can do that and you're confident in it, by all means, go for it. But if even just like the thought of that stresses you out, you probably don't want to make your goal 5,000 words a day. Know what you need and have a plan in place to be able to write well, however that looks like. To kind of like give you an example for me, I know that I need larger chunks of time back to back to write. I'm primarily a fiction writer, so part of my like writing process is I have to go back and read either the chapter before that I wrote or a couple paragraphs before, so I know where I'm kind of picking up in the story. And then even after I do that, once I start the writing itself, it takes me a little bit to kind of get in the zone again and get into the story itself. I'll also like put music on in the background. If it's like just silent, it drives me crazy. And like that silence is so loud, it distracts me, which sounds kind of weird, but that's how it is. So I know that I need some sort of like instrumental music. Glad to know I'm not the only one, Stephen. I need some sort of like instrumental music playing in the background, or, and this kind of sounds counterproductive too, but either the instrumental music or a movie or TV show that I've watched 1.5 million times, really, really low, so that it's just like the background noise of like their chatter, their dialogue, rather than like me actually being able to tell what they're saying. I also try to like incorporate as many senses as I can. So I'll often have like a candle burning if I'm sitting there for hours on end, because I know that's how I write. I also put my blue light glasses on so I don't get a headache. And then that will, yeah, there you go. Because then that will distract from the writing itself. I'll keep water or a coffee, glass of wine, depending on like the time of day, obviously, and like a snack nearby. Because you're going to get thirsty, you're going to get hungry, and make sure that you're like, I know for me too, I have to get up every so often because I am sitting there for those longer periods of time. Get up, stretch, move around, go hug your dog, play fetch for 5 minutes, like whatever that looks like. But like get up, get the blood flowing, everything like that. Really kind of like my biggest advice for authors is do it scared. Being a creative is hard. Some people don't see the value in what we do. And every time we put something out into the world, we do it knowing that it's going to be criticized by someone at some point. But what I've kind of found is that humans are resilient in a way that they don't really understand until they create. So all you can do is create and persist and keep telling the stories that demand to be told, and do it together. Writing, typically for a lot of people, when they think of like being an author or the writing process, they think of it as kind of like a solitary thing where it's just the author up in their attic pounding away at a keyboard, or writing in their notebook for hours on end, like by themselves. But make it a community-driven thing. You can get an accountability partner, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. You can, like, if you heard like the term like critique partner, it's kind of like the same thing. Really just find yourself a group of people or that one person that can hold you accountable. You can hold them accountable. And it'll ultimately end up helping make your story stronger. You can bounce ideas off of them and kind of just have that open dialogue rather than run through all of these scenarios and the character development and whatever it is that you're working on in your head and just kind of spinning in circles. I have a few people that I'll turn to depending on kind of like what stage I am in the process or what it is in the narrative that I'm stuck on. And those people have really helped me kind of unlock different elements of the narrative that I definitely wouldn't have come to on my own. So really, like, anything that you can do to find your people, do it and succeed together, because that's going to ultimately bring you more success in the end as well.
Yeah, and doing it together is, I mean, like, it's so much more fun
Mhm.
Like, because you get to, like you said, you get to bounce those ideas around and be like, hey, I have this. And like, what do you think about that? And you can be like, oh, I don't know if that'll work, but like, try it, you know, like they can be somebody who is part of a support system. And that is what can really, you know, get you through. I rely on my super fans to help me understand whether or not I'm actually making the points that I want to make. And I didn't have them for the initial draft. And I have a very, very specific way that I use beta readers. But for the super fans, they get to see everything as it happens. And it's just more fun because I get to share my excitement about things with them before the book is done. And that's something that you can also leverage, you know, in certain ways, depending on how you want to do it, for marketing your book.
Mm.
You know, being able to be like, hey guys, here's this thing. What do you guys think of this? Like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Great. You take that quote, throw it up on a social media graphic. They helped you with that. So there's more buy-in, there's more investment, all of that good stuff. Yeah, no, I love it. Definitely find friends. As the meme says, it's dangerous to go alone. All right, now we are going to Kyra, and I have a feeling that we're just going to get wrecked by Kyra because she's going to be talking about the emotional process to help you finish the first draft. And emotionally, we're all a mess. So, Dr. Kyra,
Yes.
take it away.
Yes, absolutely. So, a huge thing that motivates us to tell stories anyway is because we are emotionally invested in them and we want for other people to be emotionally invested in them as well. It, and part of the community building through storytelling comes through shared collective moments of of just emotion. And so the emotions of finishing a first draft can be earlier on. Esty and Emily did a great job of alluding to something called the self editor. Now, I'm just going to be very honest and vulnerable with you all in the same way that we're all called to be vulnerable as creatives. I was the person inside of school where if an assignment was given 2 weeks in advance, I would, and you had options of what prompts to do. I would do one prompt. I would do like the first paragraph and be like, this is garbage. And then I would start the other prompt. So I would start like 6 different papers. And then like 2 days before the assignment is due, it's like, I gotta finish this. So then I power write it and then I rewrite it over and over and over again. And then I submit it at the last possible second. So I wasn't actually procrastinating. I was just being too hard on myself in the iterative process in the same way that SD was talking about rough draft, like, or first draft 1.1. That was me with papers, probably up until my sophomore year in college, when I realized that you can't expect yourself for gold to just come out of you. Like diamonds go under pressure. Like you can't just think like, ah, yes, diamonds just pop out of the ground. Like there's nothing there. You have to, the first thing you have to acknowledge is that this process is iterative. In fact, there could be something very therapeutic in the fact that it's iterative, and it gives you the freedom to just throw things onto the page because you know you can go back and toy with it later. You have to have everything out there so you know what materials you're working with and you know what you need to add. Because if you don't do that, then you're constantly finding yourself in this negative feedback loop of it didn't start well, it didn't start well, it didn't start well. And but what is well? You see what I'm saying? Because the only person that you have in front of you in that moment is you. And 9 times out of 10, or even really 11 times out of 10, if we're all being honest with ourselves, you're probably your own worst critic. I know that I'm my own worst critic. And so a huge part of finishing up a first draft is just being honest in that it is not going to be perfect. In the grand scheme of things, your final book product is not going to be perfect. This entire process is iterative. And in a way, you have to understand that approaching perfection, or what you perceive to be perfection, is like trying to chase an asymptote. It's impossible. That's the very nature of an asymptote. Of course, there is a point in the asymptote where it like exponentiates, and you want to be like towards the end of your writing process, you want to be closer to that curve, or like near that where that line is, but it'll never touch this asymptote of perfection. There's a time where you have to relinquish it and let the rest of the world embrace it along with you. And it's the imperfections that you might perceive that other people might really resonate with. And that's an element of faith and trust that you need to have in your desire to storytell and in the story itself. Now, I think a huge component of the emotional processes to finishing up, and I am going to again be vulnerable with you guys in sharing this, there are times when I procrastinate writing scenes because I know they will be emotional for me to write. There are times when I'm like, okay, I can't finish a story because I'm not in a good place right now, and I know this scene is gonna be sad, so I'm just gonna put it in this corner and just not think about it. And sometimes I try to tell myself, well, I'll write this scene instead, but of course, me being me, in order to write that scene has to be written, and you just keep putting it off. And so another component of the emotional process of finishing up is sort of being honest with yourself in it's gonna sting. Like this is not to say that you should ever always put your mental and emotional and spiritual health first, but there are times when you kind of have to rip off the Band-Aid and press through it, because sometimes the anticipation of pain is worse than the actual pain itself. It's kind of like when you're a little kid, you're going to get a shot from the doctor. Like, I just remember being in knots about it, like, oh my gosh, it's going to be awful. But like most of the time, it's like a little pinch. You know what I'm saying? And so another huge component of working through a first draft and finishing it up is knowing that the very emotional scenes that you're anticipating are worth pushing through. Again, always be kind to yourself. Never like do something that you know is going to harm you, but also bear in mind that you're probably overestimating how much it'll take. Also, after scenes like that, I know that I have to take a break for at least a couple of days. Probably about a week ago, I wrote a scene in my current work in progress where I just cried for like a whole hour. And I wasn't even prepared for that. Sometimes that will happen in the writing process. Sometimes you will find yourself very emotionally wrapped up, but be kind to yourself, extend grace to yourself, and know that if it meant so much to you, maybe, just maybe, it'll mean that much to a reader. And that's kind of a huge portion of like what writing these stories can be about. And so in terms of some simple techniques to help you think through how to remind yourself to push through to finishing up, remember, do not expect perfection. In fact, expect far away from perfection, because you're just trying to get it's kind of like you're going into a closet and that you haven't, or in a corner of the house or your mind that you haven't been in a while, and you're just trying to clear out the closet just so you can see what's in there. Like, what do I have again? Can I organize this so that it's coherent? Like, that is what the first draft is. You just need to give yourself something to work with. Because if you were like, high school / early college Kyra, like constantly determining that the paper isn't worth writing because the first paragraph doesn't make any sense, don't be like that. That was just unnecessary stress. Embrace the iterations, because there's actually something very beautiful and therapeutic in those iterations. Remind yourself that your mental health and spiritual health and emotional health take priority over all things, but oftentimes you're overestimating how much something will hurt to write. And if it does hurt to write, be kind to yourself and give yourself breaks. And lastly, I think something that's really helpful is it's sort of what Emily was talking about earlier in terms of giving yourself small, like manageable goals sometimes I like to put a sticky note on my laptop, and I'll say, I'm going to speak to text of this scene. Now, I will confess that scribe writing or speaking to text is something that I like to do, and it's like, I just need to get this idea out of me, because otherwise my self-editor will activate, and I'll be like, I need to use this exact synonym for the word superb so that the rhythm of this sentence sounds good. No, this is not first draft thoughts. Don't think like you probably shouldn't burden yourself with thinking like that. That's the self-editor to the extreme. So if you find that there are techniques that you can use to just get the idea out of you, even if it's rough, use those ideas. I highly recommend scribe writing, especially if you are more of a talk out ideas out loud kind of a person. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I am definitely more of a talk ideas out loud kind of person. And so those are just some things to bear in mind. Iterative, embrace the fact that it's iterative, be kind to yourself, and ultimately know that this part of the process is a space for growing. That is the point. Nobody's demanding perfection of you, and you shouldn't expect perfection from yourself.
That's so good, and especially the part on iterations, and like this is that was what I was trying to hit home with during my portion of it, and I think you put it far more eloquently than I did. Is that it's those iterations that help you improve. Rewriting the same scene over and over and over again does not help you grow, regardless of who said it. Garbage, absolute garbage. Getting it done, finishing it, and then reiterating the whole thing within context of the new. That is what helps you grow. And to be abundantly clear, keep your first draft. Like I have the old time-worn pieces of paper that I hand wrote my Narnia fan fiction on. That was a huge angsty dumpster fire. Oh my goodness. But guess what? I have those over on my shelf. I can pick up and look at any one of those chapters and be like, wow, that was bad. But look how far I've come. And I also have every first draft. I've kept those things because if I get to a certain point in time, I can always reference back to it. It has purpose, and also it has purpose for future marketing, which we'll get to later in some of our other talks. Keep those because it is also important to marketing. Now, we are going to pass the baton to Zara, who's going to be talking about where most authors go wrong. And I feel like there are so many avenues for this to take place. So, Zara, how can we avoid this?
No, thank you, Stephen. Can you guys hear me? Because I've been having technical issues all evening. Okay, perfect. So I just want to say that, first of all, great job, all of you, because this is like my segment is going to be like a perfect wrap up of everything that you've just said. Because what I'm gonna be talking about a little bit, touching upon it a little bit, and we will finish up next week, is the benign tumor in your brain called the writing block. And basically, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It kind of starts with what Emily said, imposter syndrome. That's kind of like phase one. Then it turns into what Kyra talked about, self-editor and all these emotional angsty processes that writers go through. And then actually then comes the phase when the writing block comes in. But yeah, so we've all probably been through it before, right? We are staring at a blank Word document and thoughts flying away faster than money at a Vegas table, and your book is catching dust in color-coded folder marked as work or school or something else vaguely non-specific, buried under another set of color-coded folders just so your failure wouldn't stare at you every time you fire up that laptop. So yeah, as hard as it may seem to dig your way up from that hole called the writing blog. It is perfectly curable by a simple surgical procedure called reading. There is a saying in my culture we say that you can't beat the wall with your head and come out the other side uninjured. Writers think that the harder they push, the more they get done. No. Sometimes the only way isn't through, but around, if that makes sense. And how you get around procrastination or writing block or whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that's stopping you, imposter syndrome, any of these fancy new writer diagnoses we've come up with, which can usually be summed up into, I don't think I'm good enough to write a book. What I do is that I completely remove myself from the book that I'm writing for a while. Like, trust me, you'll be fine. um, I couldn't write for almost, I want to say 2 months, which is like half the time we have for finishing up our books if we want to publish in May. And I'm 3 chapters away from meeting the deadline on Friday. So obviously for NaNoWriMo, you don't have 2 months. You have a month to write your book. But where I see writers go wrong is that they panic when the writing block strikes, and it will. Doesn't matter how much time you have. The problem with NaNoWriMo is that the span of time in which you're allowed to write your book is so short that the writing block comes way, way earlier than you would expect it to. And that's what freaks writers out. I haven't even started and I already can't write. Well, it's completely normal in the time span that you're given. So I'll try and give you examples on what I do when that happens. Hopefully, some of this will work. And I'm actually aware that our opinions, my opinions, differ from Steven's. So that's actually good because we're very different writers. So whichever ones fit your lifestyle best, go with that one. So what I do is that I find myself a fresh set of eyes to look at what I've already written. Usually, it is the little tweaks that make the biggest difference. Authors who work with professional editors have a higher success rate of their work checking all the boxes of excellence. However, it can also tighten your finances, and for NaNoWriMo, not really an option. So if you take all that into consideration, it is really the audience who holds true power. Think about all the movies and TV series that critics hate but audiences love. Like, just the thought that someone is getting paid to write Riverdale's lines makes me want to drown myself in a sink. Yet the show has been renewed for the 6th season by the miracle of Jesus Christ himself. So I highly doubt that your writing is anywhere near as bad. So you can approach this from 2 angles. One, to strengthen your confidence, you can use Medium, a free platform to publish articles, and share it on your social media. Or you could also begin microblogging, which is a tool closely tied with social media to get a point across about your passions. Basically, you snap a pic of Haagen-Dazs ice cream, post it online, and write a mini article on the dangers of artificial flavoring under the post. Two, if you are not there yet with sharing a piece of your soul online, don't forget that every one of us has a personal audience in our pockets. Moms, uncles, nieces, cousins, best friends, high school English teachers. These people are equipped with knowledge about who you are as a person, and most of the time are willing to take it easy on you to build you up. My advice is not to indulge in going easy on yourself for too long, but when you're in a baby steps phase of writing, it does work wonders to have someone close to you give you a thumbs up. Adele recently said in an interview that, of course, she has her insecurities, but she doesn't hang out with people who point them out to her. And I 100% agree. You want your trap after you remove from ring, and then your love build your upload. Step 3 is to try and build the line for writing. That you kind of entered at some point a phase of hating your book and your writing. So it is important to get back to the basics of, oh, why am I actually doing this? Well, because I love reading, I love books, I love writing. That's how my love for writing started, by being a fan of books. So the secret ingredient, at least for me, is to play the opposites game. So if you're writing a sci-fi, go read a young adult novel. If you're writing about women's suffragette movement, ask a librarian to recommend a Thomas Edison biography. The key is to trick your brain into thinking. It doesn't need to be thinking about the thing it keeps thinking about. So moreover, like, you can discover a funny anecdote from Thomas Edison's life that will make for a killer metaphor in your suffragette book or whatever it is that you're writing. We are all connected, and keeping your mind open about learning outside of your field of expertise will broaden your views on the world and make you a better writer, especially because we kind of do have to know everything as writers, because we're telling so many diverse and different stories of different people. We have doctors and firefighters in our books, and we need to kind of know what those jobs encompass. So go educate yourself. And like, don't forget that to create compelling stories, you need to know people from all backgrounds to write in an empathetic way, because that way that will tie you to your readers and connect them with your art, if that makes sense. And yeah, my last tip, and I say this all the time and I will never stop: go write a short story fan fiction to rev up your writing engine. If during sleepless nights you're thinking, man, I would have wrapped up the season 5 Glee storyline better, think no further and go do it. And anonymity offers a security blanket, which you will need at first to build your confidence. So don't be afraid to venture out into the world of botched scripts and nonsense characters who will train you to watch for plot holes and grammatical mishaps later on. You can afford to mess up with no heavy heart. That is the most valuable commodity of art, the subjectivity of an opinion on it. And when you start feeling bad about your writing, just think back on Riverdale and you'll instantly feel much, much better. So yeah, I think that's it.
See, mine is Sharknado. Like, if I can at least do something better than Sharknado, then I'm doing really, really good. You know, it's the little things in life.
Oh my god.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's such. I love the diversity of perspectives that, you know, we all have, because, like, you know, when it comes to writer's block, I have a different take than Zara does, and then, you know, Kyra brings just the emotional semi trucks and then runs us over with them, and Emily is just like so spot on with like the suffering that we go through and like needing to be detailed and stuff. Like, I love that. Now I came up with this today. So, like, are you ready for NaNo? Because I feel like that's the obvious question, considering that the next Monday stream that we do is the very first NaNo session where we're actually going to be doing writing spreads. I'm not ready. Like, I mean, granted, I cheated. I started early because I wanted that Nano Rebel sticker because I'm like that. But like, I've already got the first 3 chapters of my short story done. But like, still, I'm not ready to actually do it because, again, this goes back to what I was saying about you don't have to write, you know, like every single day. NaNo, you're supposed to write every single day. Like, I know how much I have to write, and essentially during my 1 day a week, in order to hit and stay on pace with NaNo and to finish all 4 of these short story books, like, I have to be writing at least 5+ pages, or excuse me, 5+ chapters every single week. Granted, they're only like 1,000 words, so that's relatively easy to do, but that's still 5,000 words in a single sitting that I have to try and squeeze out of my brain.
What are you talking about? That's very hard.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Seems
like
easy. No, it doesn't.
All right, fine. It's incredibly difficult. It's like climbing Everest without a Sherpa. Like that's the
Yikes.
equivalent. Yeah, so I'm not emotionally ready for everything that that will be. But I'm going to show up Monday, and during the writing sprints, which I have found that sprint writing is actually super effective for me because it gives me a hyper focus that just simply writing doesn't, because I'm against the time. And if I don't get something good, then the bot insults me and I can only take so much. So, you know, it's the little things that keep us going. But how about for you guys? Like, I know not everybody's like going as crazy as I am on this, but like, what does Nano look for you? And are you guys ready for it?
So I'm going to be using Nano to finish up my work in progress. And I like I have a plan of what I'm going to do. I want to say that I'm ready for it, but I think that I'm the kind of person that's very bad at accounting for emotional breaks. And the thing is, I know that I'm going to need them. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out how many emotional breaks can I grant myself while staying on schedule? Because at the end of the day, my emotional wellness takes precedence. Like that's more important. But yeah, I think that is the big wild card of how NaNoWriMo is going to go, because you want to hold yourself accountable to reaching a goal, but you also want to be kind to yourself, but you also don't want to give yourself excuses, because I could easily rest on my laurels and be like, oh yes, I need an emotional break. And emotional breaks are real things, but then an emotional break, you really only need it to be 2 days. You're like, I'm going to take an emotional break for the next 2 weeks. You obviously can't do that to Nano. So yeah, I think that'll be holding myself accountable to those metrics while still being kind to myself will be a balance in Nano that I need to be better at. Because in my past experiences with Nano, the stories that I've written have not been, I've been able to generate a little bit more distance between myself and the story. But this story is surprisingly more personal than I thought it was going to be. So it's been harder. It's been more emotionally ringing to write.
I guess I can go next, or you, Emily,
Go
you
ahead.
want to go?
Go for it, Zara.
So for me, since I am submitting my first draft on Friday, I am going to be using Nano to do some blogging mostly. And there are 2 articles for Teen Magazine backlogged that I need to write. So obviously, writing an article for publication is a lot of work, and so I'm gonna be doing that. So hopefully, you guys don't feel betrayed by me, but it's just that's the way the deadlines are set up this year. It's not my fault the deadline is this Friday. So yeah, this week I'll be doing writing sprints kind of on my own, and then with you guys next week. But it won't be fiction. Let's put it that way. It won't be fiction.
We forgive you.
Yeah.
Maybe. We might.
Maybe.
We might forgive you.
Kyra probably won't, but
I know because yeah, we're in the same boat kind of with Kyra. So
Emily, how about for you?
So I turned in my manuscript, the second book in the Crimson Time series, Fractured Past, like a week ago to copy editing. So that is like out of my mind for the foreseeable future until I get those back. So I will be using Nano to kind of focus on a different world. I have a new adult high fantasy novel. I say novel, but it's probably going to be a series or at least a duology or something. But we're going to
Just
start.
be honest with yourself, Emily. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see where it goes. but
Ooh.
I feel surprisingly ready. I would say I'm more prepared than I have been in the past. I took the weekend to kind of like just decompress and like start fleshing out some of the plot, some of my characters. It's going to be interesting because it's going to be a dual perspective, which I've never done before. The Crimson Time series is just from, it's third person, but it's like really kind of just from Adelaide's perspective. So it'll be interesting trying to write the two narratives and have the stories like run in and of themselves, but always, but like intersect as well, like where they're supposed to like have that crossover. So yeah, I feel surprisingly good, but knock on wood, we'll see how it goes when I actually start writing.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. I love having multiple characters, and then that's when it all dissolves into utter chaos. So may the odds be ever in your favor.
Thank you.
As you embark upon multiple POVs. So guys, next week, NaNo. Okay. Next week is NaNo. Again, I'm not emotionally prepared for this, but it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be fun because we are going to be doing it together. Again, we're going to be doing live writing sprints over the course of the stream. And we'll have maybe like a couple of minutes on the front end for a topic where we can kind of just try to encourage you guys as we, launch into this whole new journey of November. And then coming up are some other fun projects that we're working on behind the scene. I'm not sure why I'm quotation. It is behind the scenes. It is literally, you guys don't get to see it. But we're coming up with some new videos that are not live streams. That'll be short, that are going to be helpful, hopefully, for you and impactful in helping you figure out like how to really maximize social media. Like that's kind of like the next big step that we're currently working on. We're excited for that, and we'll keep you guys posted for that as we go. Again, the writing templates, writing worksheets, those are going to be up and ready to go by Monday next week. So you guys will have those and be able to utilize them for your NaNo. Going to be a great, great asset for you. So keep in mind utilizing that. And guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of this week. Check out Thursday's stream. It's going to be Zara and I discussing going head to head in talking about writer's block. And it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So guys, I have a wonderful rest of your night, and we will see you guys next week. Take care, everybody.